Alright guys, it's time to get back to a project that's been sitting on the shelf for a little while. This is my dad's 1976 Nova that we are swapping a Gen V L86 into. We are planning to run this engine naturally aspirated with a set of unequal length headers and some goodies from our friends at Brian Tooley Racing. And today we are going to assemble the 6.2 liter L86 for this car and prove to you that you should stop messing with that out-of-date LS engine and move on to a Generation 5 LT. Alright guys, it's time for Calvin rants about stuff that annoys him in the car community. Today we're going to talk about why you should stop messing with LS engines. As a Chevy 6-cylinder guy, I gotta say, other platforms have been begging for the gift from God that GM gave you guys in the form of the Gen 5 LT engines. There are so many things that are so much better about it than the previous generations, and nobody's messing with it. Yeah, okay.
I declare bankruptcy!
The LT is better in so many ways, it's laughable. One of the weak points of the LS engine is the oiling system. Alright guys, let's talk about how the oiling system in an LS engine works. This is a model that I found online, and I'm going to sort of take you through where the oil travels through in the engine. So the oil pump discharges into this little port right here, and then the oil travels over to this area here. Then it takes a 90-degree turn and travels down the length of the block here. Right here, this is where the dumbbell in the engine is. Right here, this redirects the oil down into the oil filter. Then it comes back up and goes into this passage right here. Then it travels up the back of the block right here and goes into the two lifter galleys right here and here via this passageway right here. This model doesn't show it, but there are channels that come down off of the lifter galleys that intersect with the main bearings. So it is kind of a priority main, but it's very convoluted. Now, those lifter galleys, they travel all the way to the front of the engine here, and there's also a feed that feeds down to the main bearing right here. And what the LT engine does is it adds a little hole right here. And what that hole does is it interfaces with the oil pump, which is again here at the front of the engine. And that is how it gets its pressure reference from the oiling system and regulates the oil flow going into the engine. The LS engine gets its pressure reference from the outlet of the oil pump, so if there is a leak downstream, it really doesn't know, and it will only respond in a minor way. This ensures that the point of lowest pressure is being referenced so that the oil pump can give it all she's got if it needs to do so. This should eliminate a lot of the issues that the LS has as far as the oiling system go. In fact, there's a lot of guys who will not run an LS engine without a dry sump, and I think that this revised oiling system should make a huge difference. Next, we got to talk about deck strength. Are you tired of blowing head gaskets like this? Have I got the solution for you? With more webbing in the deck surface, the sleeve will be better supported so that next time you can send all 8 rods through the oil pan instead of having to replace that pesky head gasket for the 800th time. But wait, there's more! If you call right now, we'll throw in a larger diameter head bolt for just one easy payment of the same exact price as an LS engine. You could have the LT, which has more webbing in the deck surface and a larger diameter head bolt. Send those rods through the block today. The next thing that we got to talk about is the direct injection. Now, what if I told you you could put more air into the cylinder with no additional mods to the cam or the cylinder head? What people fail to consider is that the cylinder head on a port-injected engine isn't just flowing air, it is also flowing fuel. Typical gasoline-powered engines will run a air-to-fuel ratio of 11 to 12.5 to 1. With some simple math, we can figure out that about 8% of the stuff that is being drawn through the cylinder via the intake port is fuel. Now, what if we stop trying to jam the fuel through the head and instead introduce the fuel on the other side of the cylinder head? This would result in an immediate 8% improvement in cylinder head flow, which is like adding 1 pound of boost to the engine. And it would be even more significant on cars that require larger fuel volumes, like alcohol cars, such as, ethanol or methanol powered cars. And this isn't just theoretical, the tests have been performed. The Brian Tooley guys picked up 60 horsepower NA by switching from port injection to direct injection. And most of the guys out there are just taking the direct injection system and just throwing it in the garbage can. Now, direct injection doesn't come for free. It requires more complicated electronics, a higher pressure mechanical fuel pump, and in high horsepower, high RPM applications, you can actually run into a situation where you just flat out run out of time to get the fuel into the cylinder. Now, direct injection can be supplemented by port injection, like what we see in the Gen V LT5 engine, where they've added a port injector to the supercharger, which allows them to get some fuel in the port, but still most of it's supplied by direct injection. Now, this creates more complication, and it's not for everyone, but for the NA guys, this is an absolute gift. You do not have to run a more aggressive cam, you don't need more valve spring, and you instantly get an 8% improvement to cylinder head flow. Most head porters would kill for that kind of gain, and they've given it to you for free. And I haven't even mentioned the greater availability of forged steel crankshafts, the raised intake port and canted valve cylinder head that's available as standard, the stronger connecting rods that are available in LT1 engines, the piston oil squirters that are available on all engines, or the addition of higher compression ratio from factory. We could be at this all day, but I think I've proven my point. Alright, rant over.
Now listen here, son. The LT engine has been out for 10 years. Are you going to be like all those Gen 1 small block Chevy guys that you make fun of at car shows? Now drop and give me 20.
So let's get into the actual engine build. As I just mentioned, the compression ratio on the LT engines is a bit higher than the LS. And because of this, piston to valve clearance is a little bit more of a concern when you're installing an aftermarket camshaft. Now, the camshaft that we decided to go with is a BTR Gen 5 230 duration camshaft. It is 230 degrees at 50 on the intake and 240 something on the exhaust. It features 644 lift on both intake and exhaust, and if you're coming from the LS world, that's a pretty healthy cam. Because of this, we need to do what is called fly cutting the pistons. Essentially, we use the cylinder head of the engine as sort of a fixture, and we install this tool called a fly cutting tool, which basically looks like an intake valve and has a cutting blade on the bottom of it. We install that into the head and then chuck it up into the drill, and we use that cutting tool to basically grind a certain amount of clearance into the piston. This ensures that there is room for the intake valve to travel. In the case of this cam, they recommended right around 40 thousandths of material to be cut off of the piston. And you basically set that up with a feeler gauge installed under the adjustable stop on the fly cutting tool, and you grind until you hit the stop. You have to do this to all 8 pistons, of course, and this will ensure that the pistons and the valves do not contact one another when the engine is running. Once we were done fly cutting the pistons, it was time to disassemble the engine the rest of the way and get everything cleaned and ready to be reassembled. Now, the L86 is essentially identical to the LT1 that is offered in the Cadillacs, the Camaros, and the Corvettes. The only real difference is the oil pan and the intake. What that means is that this engine has a forged steel crankshaft, and that's actually something that is pretty cool about the LT engines. All LT engines came with a forged steel crankshaft, except for the 5.3 liters. They still had a nodular cast iron crankshaft, which is good for a decent amount of horsepower, but you can't beat forged steel. The LS engine, on the other hand, only offered forged steel crankshafts in the LSA and the LS9. And it's really nice to see the forged steel crankshafts making their way into lower offerings so that the performance guys like us can take advantage of them. In addition, the L86 came with the LT1 style connecting rods, which have a bit more meat at the small end of the rod. The 5.3 liters came with a rod more similar to the Gen 4 LS rods, so it is generally considered an upgrade to use an LT1 L86 rod in a 5.3 if you're looking to use all factory parts. Next, it is time to start reassembling the engine. We drop in the forged steel crankshaft that I just talked about before. Now, the main bearings on a Gen 5 LT engine are a coated bearing. We opted to get a brand new set because the main bearings in this engine were a bit tore up. One minor downgrade to the Gen 5 LT engines is they went to a 180-degree thrust, but you can use two topside thrust bearings to convert the engine into a 360-degree thrust. For the rod bearing, we went with a King extra clearance rod bearing, and I should mention that the rod bearings on a LT engine are a bit different than the LS. If you guys aren't familiar, the LS uses the same rod bearing as a Gen 1 small block Chevy, and it's been the same part number for a small block Chevrolet for 80 years or something crazy. But they changed the location of the tang on the rod bearing. It's essentially the same dimension, but with that tang relocated, you got to get a different part number rod bearing. And we got the rings to 30 thousandths of an inch, just in case we ever plan to put a little bit of boost or nitrous to this car someday. Next, it is time to install the Brian Tooley 230 duration camshaft. Once that was in the engine, we needed to take the phaser apart and install a phaser limiter. Basically, there is a lot of lift and duration on this camshaft, and you can't fully retard the camshaft with the variable valve timing because, again, the valves will run into the pistons. Therefore, we limit the travel on the cam phaser to be no more than 4 degrees of total movement. We do this by literally just installing a plug into the phaser that doesn't let it travel more than 4 degrees. Now, when installing the cam phaser onto the camshaft, this is a job that is kind of difficult because the cam is very easy to rotate when you are installing the phaser bolt, so it helps to have somebody at the back of the camshaft keeping it from rotating and keeping it from pushing back out of the way. In fact, on my Studebaker, when we did the Gen 5 L83 5.3 liter in the car, I actually installed the camshaft incorrectly, and I essentially pushed the dowel pin further into the camshaft, and I thought I had installed it correctly until I rolled the engine over, and one of the valves hit the piston, and I had to take it back apart and fix that issue. So you definitely have to be careful that the cam doesn't rotate any, and you get the dowel pin actually lined up with the phaser when you're doing this, and it's actually really easy to screw up. You can see I take the cam phaser on and off a couple times because I will really want to make sure that I get this right. Now that we have everything cleaned up and all of the rods and pistons dropped back in, along with the main caps and everything else tightened down, it is time to install the heads. For the head gaskets, we're using some OEM head gaskets from GM. They're just a stock replacement head gasket. And the cylinder heads have been ported and polished by our friends at Snyder Performance. Big thanks to them. We are using some head studs from ARP. Now you got to be careful because all of the head studs are the same length except for one of them. So you have to make sure you install that head stud in the appropriate location. Before I end this segment off here, I want to say a big thanks to John Wilburn, who you saw help put the cylinder heads on, and to Mark over at the Buck Does It YouTube channel. Both of these guys decided to stop over and give us a helping hand. We actually assembled this engine right when my dad was recovering from surgery, and it was a great help to have an extra couple sets of hands around. So big thanks to them.
I can't believe you're making me do this again. Can't believe you're making me take this thing out again.
Alright guys, did I get you? No, we're not actually going to put a 6-cylinder in the 76 Nova Project. I just wanted to use this as an opportunity to mock an engine up in this chassis because I've been developing some engine mounts for the 4200 to go into some more generic muscle car type projects. So basically how these mounts work is they will mimic the dimensions of a small block Chevrolet, and the idea is that they will place the engine mounts in the same orientation to the bell housing face, and basically make it so that you can drop one of these engines into an older muscle car like this one and just help you guys out with your engine swaps. Also, you might be able to find a small block Chevy swap kit for your chassis of choice, and as long as it has that 3-bolt flange style design there on the side, you should be able to bolt it to a 4200 and make it work in your chassis.
No, we're not putting a 6-cylinder in this one.
Yep, sorry, Dad. You'll have to suffer with the horsepower that a 6.2 can produce. I don't know if this is you might not be able to handle this one.
Yeah.
Now, the reason that this car has come back into the shop right now is because Drag Week is going to be held in our area. And assuming they don't get rid of the class, because they've yet to actually release the rules for the event, we plan to run this car in the naturally aspirated class, and we think we have an opportunity to perform very highly in that class. As I mentioned earlier, the direct injection on these engines has a lot of benefits. And what's cool is we are going to be able to make more horsepower naturally aspirated by taking advantage of this technology. Since the Gen V L86 is pretty much the largest displacement engine that you can get with direct injection, and at least with a naturally aspirated engine, there is no replacement for displacement. We should be able to make a decent amount of horsepower in the small block category of the naturally aspirated class. And hopefully we can get this car light enough that it can go mid-9s, which would have competed for second place last year. So the plan will be to put a Holley Terminator X-Max on this car for the EFI, along with one of their GDI controllers. This is pretty much the only really affordable option for running direct injection at the given time. You could run a stock computer, but I have pretty much determined that I don't want that in my life anymore. If I do anything stock computer anymore these days, it's going to be some sort of piggyback or something like that. So this car has come a very long way off camera, and it shouldn't take us long to get this thing going. And with that, that's where I'm going to end this video off right here. Make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.